So continuing with the abiotic components of the environment. Children, the abiotic components of the environment are the climate, the soil, the temperature, and the rainfall. So both of these interact with each other, and that is what brings about a balance in the ecosystem. Thus, an ecosystem consists of biotic components comprising of living organisms and abiotic components comprising of the physical factors like temperature, rainfall, wind, soil, and minerals. Now, let's talk about the two types of ecosystems. Now, you have beautiful gardens in your home and which you've created yourself. And also, we see the forests and the ponds and the lakes. So, these are all naturally existing. So, what is there in a garden? In a garden, you will find various kind of plants, that is grasses, trees, flowers, bearing fruits, rose, jasmine, and so many other animals like frogs, insects, and birds. So, they all are living together and they are interacting with each other for their growth and reproduction, and these activities are affected by the abiotic components of the ecosystem. So we say a garden is an ecosystem. Also, the crop fields where you grow the crops, that also is an ecosystem created by man. So mainly ecosystems are of two types. They are artificial or man-made and the natural ecosystems. So a garden and a crop field are examples of the man-made ecosystem, and the forests and the ponds and the lakes, these all are examples of natural ecosystem. Now we also have aquariums in our home. So that is also an example of the artificial ecosystem. What do? We take a kind of a container or a large jar, then we provide oxygen with the help of a pump, and then what we do? We put some fish in it, and then some plants and all. So we create an ecosystem which is artificial, or we say it is man-made. So this is an example of a man-made ecosystem. So that means we can categorize the ecosystems into two, that is artificial or man-made and the natural ecosystem. Now let's talk about the biotic components, right? So in the biotic components, we have mainly three components, that is the organisms which can produce their own food, okay? And like depending upon how the organisms are getting their sustenance, we can categorize the biotic components into three, that is the producers, the consumers, and the decomposers. So let's talk first of all about the producers. Now these are the organisms which can make organic compounds like sugar and starch from the inorganic substances, okay, like carbon dioxide, like water, and they use the radiant energy of the sunlight, and they make starch from the inorganic substances like radiant energy of the sun in the presence of chlorophyll. So only the green plants and the certain bacteria which have this pigment in them can produce food by photosynthesis, and they come under this category of the producers. So that means they can produce their own food, they are capable of self-sustenance, and they produce that food in the form of starch by using inorganic substances under the sunlight with the help of the green pigment called as chlorophyll. So this is the first component of the biotic components, first type of biotic component. Then the next is the consumers. Now these organisms, they depend on the producers either directly or indirectly for their sustenance. So these organisms, they consume the food produced from directly or indirectly, and they feed on other consumers. So they are said to be consumers, and we can classify them accordingly into three categories, that is herbivores, the plant eating animals, or the animals who just feed on the plant and the plant products. Then the carnivores, the flesh eating, and omnivores, which can feed both on the plant as well as the animal products. We also have the fourth category, that is parasites. Now what are parasites? Parasites are the organisms which depend on a organism by staying on the body of the organism or staying inside the body of the organism for their sustenance. So they do not kill the organism or the host from which they are deriving their nutrition, but they use the food or the whatever the host organism consumes either by living on the body, so we call them as ectoparasites, and once they are within the body of the organism, we call them as endoparasites. For example, an example of the ectoparasites, we see various ticks or various fleas sticking on the animals' bodies, or even human lice is an example of the ectoparasites. And you studied in your previous class the various kind of worms which infest your alimentary canal, either the stomach or the intestine. So they are living inside your body, like your filarial worms or the roundworms, and they derive their nutrition from your body. So they are said to be the endoparasites. So these are the four types of biotic components which are dependent on the you can say the producers, the consumers, the and in the consumers we have the carnivores, the herbivores, and the omnivores and the parasites. Now, the third component is the decomposers. Now, what happens when an animal or plants they die? Children, for some time there's the foul smell which keeps coming, but after some time then that is all decomposed and it gets mixed up with the soil. Now, who does this cleaning? These are the very important components of biotic components, which are the microorganisms, okay, and they comprise of the bacteria and fungi. What do? They break down the dead remains, okay, and the waste of the organisms, that is all the organic matter. They are the decomposers, and they what do? They break down the complex organic substances into simpler inorganic substances, which again go back to the soil and are used up once again by the plants. So just think what would happen if the garbage or the dead animals and the plants, they keep lying on the roads or anywhere. So it would be difficult for us to live over there. So they are very important part of the ecosystem as they decompose all these organic matter, and they naturally replenish the soil by mixing up, by breaking down the organic these substances into simpler substances which get mixed up with the soil. So they are a very important part of the you can say the biotic components. So what do? What is their benefit? They decompose the dead bodies of plants and animals. They act as cleansing agents, and by decomposing, what do? They return the elements back to the soil from which they can be used again, and they are helpful in recycling the elements in the environment. So this is all we have about the four types of the biotic component, that is producers, the consumers, and the decomposers. The three types of biotic components: producers, plants; consumers, we have the herbivores, the carnivores, and the omnivores, and the parasites; and we have decomposers, which are also the cleansing agents. Now we talk about the various food chains and food webs. Children, the organisms are dependent on other, like plants, as we mentioned, for food, and there is an organism which is eaten up by another organism, and so on. So we have kind of a chain which is being built up. So this whole thing, that is who eats whom, is said to be a food chain. Now, a series of organisms feeding on one another. So this series of organisms taking part at various biotic levels, they form a food chain. Okay. Now, each step or a level of the food chain we say it is a trophic level. Okay. Now, the autotrophs. So from where would all the food chain start? Definitely, it would be the producers, because they are only the organisms which are capable of making their own food. So each of the food chain starts from the autotrophs or the producers. So they are the first trophic level. What do? As we studied earlier, they fix up the solar energy and make it available for the consumers or the heterotrophs, and by making starch. Then the herbivores or the primary consumers are the ones which directly depend on the plants. Okay, so and the second, that is the small carnivores or the secondary consumers who consume the herbivores, and the third are the larger carnivores or the tertiary consumers, which form the fourth trophic level. So this is how a chain is being built up, because one organism is dependent on another organisms for their food. It's only the plants or the producers which are capable of sustaining on their own, because they're capable of trapping sunlight and preparing food. But the consumers, that is heterotrophs, the second trophic level, then the larger carnivores, the third, and so on. The tertiary consumers are the fourth trophic level. So we know that food we eat acts as a fuel. Now, why do we eat food? We know we need energy for doing various activities, and food that we eat gives us a fuel or provides us with energy. So what is happening is the interactions among various components of the environment. It involves a flow of energy from one component to another, to the system to another, because one organism is dependent on the other for food. So what is actually passing from one organism to another? It is the flow of energy, because each is depending on energy and on another one for food, and food is providing energy. So right from plants till the tertiary consumers, it is the flow of energy which is occurring in this food chain. So this energy supports all the activities of the living world. So from autotrophs, the energy goes to the heterotrophs and decomposers. However, as we see in the previous chapter, source of energy, there's one form of energy. Of course, you'll be studying that chapter, that one form of energy changes into another. We cannot see that and can be used again. So the flow of energy between the various components of the environment has been extensively studied, and these are the various things, or these are the various rules, or these are the various conclusions which have been drawn as to how the flow of energy